I want to tell you a story that emphasizes for me when I first sort of imprinted how important empathy was. For this, we're going back to high school for me. Actually 8th grade, so just before high school. And I had I'd moved to a new school, so I managed to shed the name Stripper Boy, which was good. And I arrived at this new school, and I was fortunate because I had already moved several times to different countries, and so as a kid, I had sort of picked up what you needed to do when you arrived somewhere. I knew that I couldn't have told you these words, I couldn't have told you this is what I was doing, but I knew to enter into an observational phase. I knew that I was in a new place, I was naked, and I needed to figure out how to make myself work in this surroundings. And there was a girl who moved to the school the same time I did. Her name was Stephanie. And Stephanie was from Eastern Europe, and she started the same time I did. This was Stephanie's first international move, though, and Stephanie had an incredibly rough time. Stephanie stood out. She didn't know she needed to do kind of an observational phase. And she got made fun of. She was an easy target, and it soon became the thing to do to pick on Stephanie. And the kids were pretty brutal. I don't think they were necessarily mean kids, but they were brutal. And they picked on the way she spoke. They picked on the food she brought for lunch. They picked on her traditions. They picked on her not knowing common things that they knew. They used to steal her things. They would vandalize her things. They would take every opportunity to make sure she felt like an outsider, as if she didn't already enough. I mean, physically, they would make sure and talk in small groups and position themselves so she could see that they were all gathered together and laughing, and she was absolutely not part of it. And I witnessed this. I witnessed this as an 8th grader. And I knew what that felt like. I knew what it was like to be that new kid. I knew what it was like to be the outsider because I'd been it a few times. And I felt for Stephanie. I felt for Stephanie and wanted so much for her just to feel like she belonged. But I was a pretty fearful little 8th grader. I was pretty fearful of being in the new school myself. So the best I could muster, the best I could do, was that every chance I got, if I ever saw Stephanie standing alone, I would go and speak to her. And I would ask her about where she came from. I would ask her how her day was. I would ask her about her classes. They were never even deep conversations, but I knew her name, and I wanted her to at least know that I cared about what was going on in her life. It was never deep. It never got into anything that really scratched much below the surface, but I still, day by day, would take the time to at least say a few sentences to her. It's not like it cost me a lot of effort. I was just answering a call inside of me that says, this person is hurting, and that made me hurt. That's empathy. And I experienced that because I moved around, because I knew what that experience felt like, and I knew how awful it feels to be alone. In middle school, kids are still figuring out themselves. In fact, in middle school, those empathy muscles are beginning to develop. And we hope that through social norming, through culture, through the schools and parents' influence, the kids will move beyond a point where they're pushing those boundaries in mean ways and will actually flex those empathetic muscles. We hope that they will develop to the point that they are moved by the feelings of others and that will drive them to not be hurtful, that will drive them to be inclusive. It's a very scary fact that the world we live in now, our environment does not provide quite as much social norming in that direction. And because it doesn't provide it, there's a huge responsibility on us to be able to enforce it. We have to add back in intentionally some of the things that we have moved past artificially. I want to illustrate this with one final story, a story about a bank, which doesn't sound like anything that would connect with empathy, but banks really, even banks have empathy. I worked in a bank for a while. It was one of the most fantastic jobs that I've ever had. And I want to let you in on a little secret. It probably doesn't apply to all banks, but it applied to the bank that I worked at. We looked forward to being robbed. We got super excited about it. Because we had these ingenious little die packs. And there's a little die pack, and they put it in a bundle of cash. The top notes, the bottom notes are real, the middle is fake. There's a little die pack, a receiver, and a small explosive. The way these work, as long as that receiver can hear a signal from the vault, nothing happens. But if you move that pack far enough away from the vault and the signal doesn't make it to the receiver, the explosion goes off, the die covers all the money and the robber. It's fantastic to watch. We, as tellers, would get a $500 bonus if we gave out a die pack. So at staff meetings, we would fight over who got to be robbed next. And we would argue about, well, Laura was last week and James was 3 weeks. It's my turn. I get the next robbery. Me. I deserve the bonus. It was my turn to be robbed when a suspicious character came into the bank. The suspicious character did everything that someone robbing a bank would do. They were nervous and fidgeting in line. They would let people go in front of them. I was so excited, but I couldn't show it. I had to very calmly go, "Can I help you?" And they did exactly what a robber would do. They slid a note across the desk. The note usually just says something like, "Put all the money in the bag, don't press any alarms, and no one will get hurt." This was a full page, front and back, handwritten. The note opened with, "Dear Chris, you probably remember me." And then it continued on and described the middle school that I had gone to. And about a paragraph down, I realized that standing in front of me was Stephanie. As I continued reading the note, she went to recall our time in middle school together. And very articulately, in handwriting on this note, she spelled out what her experience was like. And it was heartbreaking to read. It was heartbreaking to watch back in middle school, having the comprehension of a middle schooler, but to read it from an adult looking back on it was truly, truly heartbreaking. She said that once she arrived, it was a constant onslaught of fear, and that everywhere she turned, she was terrified that someone was going to make fun of her. She felt alone, she felt confused, she couldn't get the social cues that everyone around her had, and she was miserable. And she talked about how it made her feel useless and worthless, that everyone saw her as just something to be made fun of. She continued on in the note and described that when she finally left high school, she didn't even apply for college or even any jobs, because she thought any time I'm around other people, I seem to be nothing more than something they make fun of to make themselves feel good, and I don't think I have it in me to do that. I can't go to a college or a job where that's going to keep happening. And so she didn't do anything, and eventually fell into a deep depression. And she explains in the note that she was sitting on her bed, about to take her life, about to end it all, because that was the only end to suffering she could see. And as she was sitting on her bed, pills in hand, she looked back to when these feelings began, back to middle school. And there she said she remembered me. And she went on to describe in the note the feeling that she would have when she saw me in the hallway. And she said that when she saw me, she forgot everything else, because she knew that if she made eye contact with me and I came and spoke with her, that while I was speaking with her, nobody else could be picking on her. She said she remembered my face and a feeling of safety washed over her. She said she remembered my face, and then in the note she used these words, and she said, and the hope was annoying. She goes, because just the memory of that feeling made it impossible to take my life. She goes, I remembered your face, and you stopped me, and I hated you for it. And she said the next day, she recalled even more. But she recalled and thought about other people in her life who she found that small little glimmer of safety with. And she said eventually she decided she would see a counselor because she was stuck with this feeling she couldn't shake, and it made her feel uneasy. And she said eventually she did. She sought counseling, and she got her life together. And she wanted to come and thank me personally. So she stood before me in a bank as I read a handwritten note, tears streaming down her face. I had tears streaming down my face. And as I looked through the tears, she looked at me and said, thank you. She said, I'm alive today partially because of you. Stephanie thanked me and quietly left. And I stood there, tears, I would like to say, streaming down my face, but actually leaping off my face. My bank manager read the note, and he began to cry. Basically, the whole bank was reduced to tears. We had to close. No more money for customers. No more Kleenexes in the whole building. And we ended up having a discussion. This is a bank. We closed and had a little small group discussion with the whole staff. And they asked me, and they said, do you remember this girl? And I said, I do. And they said, well, how do you feel? And I said, to be perfectly honest, I feel a bit ashamed. I said, do you realize I did hardly anything? I said a few sentences. I literally gave some breath. And that was it. The reality is that a little bit of breath, a few sentences, were apparently enough to spark saving a girl's life. That's phenomenal. The lesson that I take from this, that I think is important to share with you, is quite simply that every interaction gives or takes life. There is no such thing as a neutral interaction. Look at the world we live in today. We are capable of so much more interacting. We have social media. We're more connected. We use words like friend and community. We throw them out everywhere. We have so much opportunity for interaction. And yet epidemic loneliness is on the rise, and yet empathy has fallen off, which warns me that despite our increased capability for interaction, not near enough of it is life-giving. I want to leave you with a quote that I leave most of my presentations with because I think it's such a good one, by someone far more clever than I. And the quote simply says this, that our gift to the world around us is hope. And it's not a blind hope that pretends that everything is fine when clearly it's not. But it's the kind of hope that comes from staring pain and suffering right in the eyes and refuses to believe that's all there is. When I looked in Stephanie's eyes, even as a middle schooler, I saw pain and suffering. I didn't even know it at the time, but basically what I was doing was refusing to believe that that was all there was. We, my dear friends, we know about nakedness. We know what it is to be vulnerable. We know that we have to take action, that we have to invest work into building connections and community. Your gift to the world around you is hope. And it's not a blind hope that pretends that everything is fine when clearly it's not. But it's the kind of hope that comes from staring pain and suffering right in the eyes and refuses to believe that's all there is. How fantastic that we get to come together and learn about empathy and learn things that are valuable in such a global scale. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for the investment that you make to the world around you. Thank you.